alumni who may be with us, all of you alumni who are with us, coming back to revisit. Really appreciate you taking time out of your busy days and schedules. Very excited for you to hear something today that I hope impacts you and impacts your future so that you can be as successful as you want to be and be able to thrive wherever you are. Well, let's go ahead and get started. Our conversation today is about disability disclosure and accommodations in the workplace, a really important topic. And so I figure I would open this one up. And Dave, I'm going to kick off with you. In the workplace, for students at least, the concept of workplace accommodations can be new, can be scary, can feel different, especially compared to maybe accommodations they've received in an academic setting.
Right.
I know for me personally, I really appreciated having extra time on tests. I have ADHD, I'm neurodivergent. And so that was really important to me. But that doesn't apply so much in a work setting, right? Because it's not that I'm taking tests all the time. So it feels very different. So can you provide maybe some quick ideas or brief overview of what you think workplace accommodations could look like, and maybe in your perspective, how they might differ from what students are familiar with in an academic setting?
Yeah, absolutely, John. It's a great question to kick things off, and thanks for inviting me to be part of this panel, Leanne. I think one of the biggest differences that changes from moving from academia, from school to work is, well, for one, nothing's given to you. Nothing's handed to you. Nothing's guaranteed like it was when you were in school. There are laws that require your school to make sure that you're given the supports and accommodations you are legally entitled to. At work, there are laws to protect you. However, a lot of this is now on you. It's on you to let your employer know, or your prospective employer know, what supports you might need. And I think this is the biggest shift, John, that I've seen. And I think it's part of the challenge, is that when we're in school, we are told the supports we need. Those are identified for us by special ed teachers and transition coordinators and school psychologists. And it's fed to us, and it's very good, and it's very useful. What the shift that has to happen, John, is when you enter the workforce as an adult, now it's incumbent upon you to recognize when you have support needs. What are they? When do you need them? In what context? What could help you bring your full self to work? What could help you get the job done if you're struggling? And I think that's the biggest shift. Is in school, it's kind of standardized, and it's handed to you. And in fact, many times impressed upon you what your needs are and what your supports will be. Now, as an adult, much more responsibility is on your shoulders to identify for your boss, for your prospective employer, what your needs might be. That doesn't mean you have to say everything about your life story and that you have to tell them all about a disability. I think we'll talk about this as we get going in this discussion. But it does mean you have to have some sense of self-understanding and some sense of what help you might need to get the job done at work. And I think that's a big challenge for a lot of people coming out of school, John.
Yeah, I think probably one of the most important things that any student could get from their time in school is a greater self-awareness, right? That self-development.
Right.
And on that topic, self-advocacy is crucial. And Eric, I know that you have a lot of experience in the work that you do around student success. So are there particular skills or strategies that you'd suggest students develop while still in school that's going to help them effectively advocate for themselves in a professional environment?
Yeah, thanks, John, and thanks for having me on the panel. I'm neurodivergent too, although I didn't realize it until long after I was out of school, so I didn't really go through this personally. As Dave said, there's that shift, especially going from high school to college, where you have to start to self-advocate more. So if you have been in college, then hopefully you've already had the experience of self-advocating for yourself around your accommodations. If you had a list of accommodations that was sort of worked out when you started college, and maybe you feel like, oh, I don't know if I'm really going to need this extra time, or testing in a separate room, or sitting at the front of the class, maybe you're not sure if you need it. First of all, it's really good to get those implemented while you're in college. And one of the differences between college and the workplace is, in college, you have to not negotiate, but re-implement and re-request those accommodations every term with every instructor. So it's a new semester, you've got new professors, you have to go to each professor potentially if you want those accommodations and say, hey, here's my list of accommodations from the Disability Services Office. I'm hoping you'll, help me get these in this course. In the workplace, I think it's more of a one and done situation. Those of you who are in the workplace can maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but you maybe have that conversation. And if you get, let's say, different lighting in your cubicle, or the ability to wear headphones, or whatever your accommodation is at work, you don't have to keep asking for it. You've got it. In college, you do have to keep asking for it. And even if you don't think you need it, it's a good idea to get those in place, because number one, what if you do need it? What if, it's the end of the term, it's midterm or final, and you do need that extra time on test? Well, if you didn't negotiate for it, if you didn't work that out with your professor at the beginning of the term, it's too late. You can't go back retroactively and say, oh, I got a disappointing grade on the final. I should have told you that I needed extra time. So you want to get that in place in case you need it, number one. And number two, it's great practice in self-advocacy for when you do go into the workplace, so that you've been doing this so regularly that you're very comfortable having those conversations and potentially pushing back if there's a need for it. Hopefully you're working at an organization that's super accommodating, but if they say, I don't know, we've never had anybody ask for that, I don't know if we can do that, got to be prepared to sort of step up.
Yeah, I think that is so crucial. One of the things that I see a lot with the work we do with clients is a lot of people who get diagnosed in adulthood after they've graduated, and they may not have had the benefit of that self-discovery during school. So one area where I see some similarities with the ongoing talking to every professor is the ongoing discovery of, oh, you know what? I don't know what I need. And having a conversation with human resources. And then a year later, you know what? I've learned something, having another conversation. So I've seen a lot of accommodation discussions be this sort of ongoing conversation, and the best conversations are with organizations that are the most committed to accessibility, and that leads me to an incredibly inclusive employer, Chauncy, Wells Fargo, that I happen to know a lot about, and I really respect everything that y'all are doing to be a workplace for all.
Yep.
So from your point of view, what are some of those best practices that employers can implement, or that you're seeing employers implement, that maybe students here could look forward to in an effort to create an inclusive workplace, and that encourages not just the accommodation side, but also trying to encourage people to disclose and be comfortable in their own skin every day at work?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that, and thank you all for the opportunity to be on the panel. I absolutely love everything that Dave and Dr. Endlich had to say on this topic as well. I can tell you, as an employer, I get to sit on the other side of it. So first of all, I am a person. I have a hearing disability, so went through undergrad on campus, not disclosing, quite frankly. Did not disclose my disability till much later into my professional career. We can maybe talk a little bit about that later. So having been on that side of it, certainly understand this to a certain degree. But everything that's been shared first, again, I echo. I would also say that self advocacy is really instrumental as you come into the workplace, because, as Dr. Endlich mentioned, no one is going to necessarily ask you for it. And I'll be quite frank, a lot of employers are afraid to even have the conversation, if I'm being totally honest. So, because we and I won't count myself in that, but I spend a fair amount of time just advocating for people with disabilities across my organization. And even in 2023, I'm always surprised to just learn just how skittish leaders are to engage in the conversation. So I would say that, as much as you feel comfortable as you're entering the workplace, disclosing, seeking out accommodations with our HR business partners for that particular organization. If you don't feel comfortable disclosing to your hiring manager, certainly making sure that you have whatever accommodations that you need. I would, and I think we may talk about this a little bit later, but that self-disclosure and bringing your full self to work, I can tell you from personal experience, it means all the difference. It makes all the difference in the world for me personally. I was having a hard time hearing in meetings, and I just was a little more standoffish, and that manifested itself in my performance reviews in the form of the lack of engagement when really it couldn't have been further from the truth, right? And so I share that piece of my story with you so that it might encourage you to feel more comfortable sharing your full self, bringing your full self to work, and disclosing as much as you feel comfortable as you're entering the workforce. And so, advocating for yourself as much as you can on the front end. There are changes, right? So, in our organization, we're a large organization, almost 300,000 strong. So, changing from department to department, as Dr. Endlich mentioned, is almost like similar to being in school, where you may have to you can bring that lighting or that special font software or whatever it is that your accommodation may be from one job to the next, because in a lot of cases we have people moving from city to city, from uptown to downtown, different office spaces that have different accommodation or access requirements, if that may be what your challenge is. And so there is some of that in the workplace. So it may be not only with HR in the workforce that you're having to say, hey, I'm moving from here, I had this accommodation in this location, I may need something a little bit different. I need to make sure I maintain this in this new location. But I think, and we may talk again and talk about it a little bit later, but really having that conversation with your leader as much as you can, or as best you feel comfortable, is going to be critically important to you feeling that you're bringing your full self to work, would be my initial thoughts on that.
Yeah. One other thing that I've seen a lot too is shifting from manager to manager, you know. So one thing I'll point out is there's this discussion around formal and informal accommodations that happens. So for all you students, formal accommodations, you submit that official request through usually a human resources department of some kind, or sometimes there's other departments, but typically it's human resources, and you get this documented accommodation after it's gone through an approval process, right? But sometimes you have a relationship with a manager and they want to make sure you're set up for success. And so maybe you have a discussion and they start giving you instructions in writing, or maybe they start recording all of your one-on-one calls so that you have a transcript, or maybe they have weekly one-on-one calls with you and that might not have been part of their plan. And sometimes those look a bit more informal. One piece of advice I would say is try to get those documented as much as possible, because the thing that I hate seeing, we're working with candidates and then their manager changes and all these great supports they had go away because they were based on this awesome relationship they had with their manager, but they never went through that process of, you know, going to HR. And Dave, I see you came off mute. Something you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, you're so observant, John. I actually have a good story about this. I had an autistic colleague for many years who was, professional, PhD level, right? Very, very, very intelligent woman. Her autism would manifest in different ways. And one way was in the afternoons, after lots of calls. The afternoon could get very difficult for her to be verbal on calls. She could be on call, but participation might change and it might be more passive. And so I would be ready and I'd take over for presentations or meetings we were having. And she would take over for me, by the way, in the mornings. I am not a morning person. It took me hours to kind of hit my stride. And like we realized together, we were supporting one another and accommodating each other's strengths and weaknesses in this unofficial, cool way. And we should document it because we're not going to work together forever. And she should find someone who can do this for her when I leave. And we have parted ways, and I hope she has someone that does that for her. But it was a cool moment where we both realized how we were helping one another out, and it wasn't the neurotypical doing something special for the the autistic. It was mutual, and it was I don't know, just a wonderful moment we had.
Oh, great story. Well, kind of on that point, Dr. Lee, no matter how much we try, there are going to be times at work throughout our careers where an accommodation request is going to get approved, and then there's going to be times where they're not approved, where they're denied, or maybe they're not implemented the way we want them to be implemented. So how do you suggest students prepare while they're in school for potential challenges that might come from not getting an accommodation that they hope to get, or maybe steps they can take to get better at negotiating and finding alternative solutions that might get approved, because every business is going to look at certain situations in different ways.
Okay, hi, I'm Othelia Lee. I'm a professor here at UNC Charlotte in the School of Social Work. Currently, I'm in Atlanta. I just arrived in my hotel for a conference, and there actually my room is not ready, so I'm in the lobby, hotel lobby. So this is a very public place. I hear all kinds of noise. So it's really hard to concentrate, and this is where I really need accommodation. So yeah, I think, I have a visual impairment, and in my career, there are various points, I was very, I guess it was kind of easy, to accommodate me, because what I need is, computer software, JAWS, that reads, there's a screen reader program. And also I need a large monitor, and, I'm very upfront about, what I need. I mean, I guess I cannot make eye contact very well. So my disability is very visible to other people and visible to me too. So I usually, very upfront about it. But you are right, Brian. There was some times that, I guess employer understand, particularly, for me being in the academia, also school of social work, the best place to get an accommodation, right? So I don't have to go far to persuade people that I need this accommodation, and they have to be on board, legally, ethically, professionally, right? But still, there are some times that I had a difficulty. I think it was one dean who refused to provide a large monitor for me because he and he thought that I already got it, so I don't need it. But I think there was a person, it was an international person coming from other country. He doesn't understand the significance of ADA. So I have to go for educate him about that's what you need to do. And then, he was on board. And there were other times that, my also during the COVID, and that was very difficult situation. So I filed an incident report, and that goes to HR. So HR director on behalf of me was, contact. I guess there are some mean-spirited people. So, I guess she know that's what you need to do legally, ethically, but she didn't cooperate, and she was actually the lame dog, so she didn't budge. So, but also because she's leaving soon, I guess I chose not to make a big deal about it. But then, we have a new director come in, and it was not even a question for her to provide the accommodation I need, which is, reading, hiring of students to read, what's, in the chat, in the Zoom room when I was teaching online. So that was a very easy accommodation, and it doesn't cost very much, but still there might be people, that was not, on board to it. And that's difficult to do it. I guess even, I took the right step. It was working hard, but still, it's a disgrace that happened. But I guess, it's like, I think probably the best way of being flexible and try to work with person and just do your best to persuade that person, and try to also, communicate about, it is also their advantage to provide the accommodation for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. And I appreciate you being on the panel in spite of your travel and having to find a spot to present, because I know you're in a public place, so I appreciate your flexibility and tenacity to be here and share your perspective. Well, one thing that I would suggest to all students, and I don't see this often, so you have the time now, hopefully, if you're not like getting ready next week to enter the workforce for some reason, but you have the time now to try to put together a list of accommodations that you may need and have them in writing. That's really, really important, especially for new folks that are entering the workforce. Often one of the scariest things is figuring out what you need. First of all, don't be ashamed that you have to request an accommodation, okay? Accommodations are designed to level the playing field and make sure you can do the best job you possibly can so you can thrive. And as Dr. Lee just said, everyone benefits from providing accommodations. So you have nothing to be ashamed about. You're not an inconvenience. You're not getting in the way. You're going to be a phenomenal worker, and the accommodation is only going to help that along. So that's the first piece of advice. But use the website Job Accommodation Network, JAN, to find a list of accommodations. They break it down by disability type that you can actually look for that might give you a starting point. You can use ChatGPT to ask it for additional insights into some of those accommodations, and then get them on paper so that when you need to make a request, you're not scrambling, so to speak, and trying to figure out what you're going to say. So that would just be a piece of advice I'd offer that would supplement what Dr. Lee said. Now, to that point, we know that one of the main places we all see accommodations mentioned is during the hiring process, right? We see on the application, do you have a disability? The number one question I get, I imagine the rest of the panelists, number one question you all get is, should I disclose before I get offered the job? Should I disclose after? Is there a rhyme or reason to that? Eric, I wanted to ask you, in terms of initiating the disclosure conversation, I know you've probably had lots of discussions with students in your work. What point in the process do you recommend someone disclose, if at all? And then what would be some effective ways that you'd suggest to students to initiate that conversation?
Yeah, are you talking about in the workplace or at
Yeah,
school?
yeah. Well, I mean, it could be either. If they're
Mhm.
if students are here and they're still trying to figure out, we know disclosure in the academic setting is a big issue too, right? We want to make sure people are getting the supports they need academically. So either way, you want to take that question.
Well, as Dr. Lee said, there are situations where if you're interviewing in the workplace where a disability is quite visible, where there isn't really an option to not disclose it. When you're applying to college, you're sending your transcript and your essays and other pieces. They don't, unless you do an interview, which is, if it's available at all, is typically optional. They don't necessarily see you or talk to you, or so it would be very easy in many cases not to disclose a disability. Some of my students attend high schools that are exclusively for neurodivergent students, where a college admissions reader could pretty easily figure out, well, they must have a learning difference if they're at this school. But most of the time, you wouldn't know, a college wouldn't know unless you disclosed it. So it's completely optional when you're applying to college, completely optional, just as it's optional in the workplace to disclose it. And so sometimes my students disclose it when they're applying to college or grad school because there's something in their application that needs explanation that might be confusing or concerning if it wasn't explained. I didn't take foreign language courses in high school because I had a disability waiver, for example, or my grades went up in 11th grade because I got diagnosed with ADHD and put on medication, and I'm now able to focus so much better. So that's one situation, explaining things. Another situation is where nothing necessarily needs explanation, but a student wants to disclose because they feel it's a key part of their identity. And so in those cases, they typically will write about it in an essay. And I've had lots of students do that with very good results. For some students, whatever their diagnosis or disability might be, they're proud of it. They own it. They feel good about it. This kind of goes back to what Chauncy was saying earlier about bringing your whole self to the workplace or to the college application process or grad school application process. You have gotten this far. You deserve to feel good about yourself. If you've been selected if you've been offered a job, you've gone through this process, you should feel good about that you are qualified to take the job. And there's no reason why you can't also disclose your disability. lots of accommodations, as one of you said before, it's nothing to be ashamed of. I'm reminded of the film Hidden Figures, where there's no women's bathroom in the building that one of the women is working at, and she has to run to another location. It's like that is more than reasonable to expect, and lots of accommodations are like that, where they're not going to cost the employer a lot. They're in many cases they're free, and they're completely reasonable. So that term reasonable accommodations is maybe vague, but it's important. In most of the cases, employees and students are being very reasonable with what they're asking.
John, could I add something to what Dr. Eric said? I agree completely. And I'm wondering if the other panelists have seen this change over time, that, not long ago, 5, 7, 10 years ago, certainly, an autistic person, otherwise neurodivergent person, had really pretty good reason not to disclose. If they had a hidden disability, they probably rightfully worried that they'd be judged, or someone would be misunderstanding them, or there'd be some bias attached to someone's notion of what autistic really means, etc. In these last 10 years or so, there's been this incredible shift. And employers like Chauncy at Wells Fargo really are seeking you out. They are truly not looking to weed you out. They're looking to weed you in. This is the first time that this has happened. It's a very active, affirmative process. And we're following some of the success on other, race and gender and other inequities. And here comes disability. And so I just want you to know that if you did feel like you had really good reason not to disclose, I encourage you to reconsider it. It's still a really personal decision, and it doesn't mean everyone should disclose all the time. But I just encourage you to reconsider it. I think the equation has changed. And I wonder if other panelists who've been in this field for a while agree that this truly is shifting.
Yeah, absolutely, Dave. I couldn't agree more. And look, to your point, it really is at the end of the day, an extremely personal decision, and each of us has to disclose based on how we feel comfortable. But what I will tell you again, having done and involved in this work for a long, long time, on both sides of the table, quite frankly, is that the culture has it has shifted in corporate America, in that we're starting to see the benefits, right? I think companies look, it's the right thing to do. The ADA is out there, and so there are guidelines around accommodations, and it's a feel good thing to do as an employer. But quite frankly, there's a bottom line impact, right? So if you look at studies around people with disabilities, at least in my personal experience as an employer, and research I've done personally, and this research I've done just in the industry, people with disabilities and employers that are starting to understand this typically are they perform on par, if not higher, than other individuals. There are less HR issues, less attrition, right? So for me as an employer, all that goes to the bottom line, quite frankly. And so I think, obviously companies understand the importance of it, but quite frankly, there's a bottom line impact in a positive way that companies understand in a way that they haven't before. And so with that, again, going back to the point that it is certainly an extremely personal decision to disclose and when to disclose, I would encourage individuals who feel comfortable to lean into it, because we are looking for those individuals who who may be different in some way. Right. And we are embracing that as a country, I think, more than ever before, and certainly as corporate America. And I get the opportunity to engage with lots of leaders in different industries. Certainly in banking, I'm seeing it in different industries as well. And so, again, a personal decision, but I would encourage you, young folks, or those of you who are coming or entering the workforce for the first time, if you feel comfortable, to disclose as soon in the process as you feel comfortable. And I think you will feel better as you move through your career if you were to do so.
I could not agree more with that. And me personally, I recognize I have a lot of privilege in my career. I have not had the situation that I just needed to take a job. Really, at many points in my life, I've been able to have decent employment, and that's fortunate. But with that said, one reason I disclose, or there's two reasons. One is I want my colleagues to understand me, to understand that if I interrupt you, it's not because I'm rude. It's not because I don't listen. It's not because I don't care about your point of view. It's because it's the way my brain works. When I get excited, I just sometimes don't hold back those ideas. They sort of flow out of me. And all I need you to say is, hey, let me finish. Oh, sorry. That's all I need, right? I don't want you thinking something about my character that isn't true. So I disclose to my colleagues. But another reason I disclose, and I do it before I get the job, is because how someone reacts to me disclosing says more about what it's going to be like working there than anything else they say to me, right? And so what we tell our clients, I have the pleasure of doing training with all of our clients. So we work with many large organizations, and I train on neurodiversity and inclusive interviewing and all these great topics to help organizations build that culture Chauncy's talking about. And one of the things I say is the first thing out of your mouth should be, thank you. That's the first thing you should hear from someone when you say, I'm autistic, or I have an invisible disability, or, it may look like I have a disability, but here is what it actually is. First thing should be thank you, because that's a very human moment, a moment of vulnerability, right? There, even though the world is a lot better than it was 10 years ago, like Dave said, there's still things that people are afraid of because they've had experiences where maybe they've been discriminated against, or maybe you haven't been in the workforce, but you've heard stories from people who have been, and those might make you nervous. So it's understandable to have those feelings, but I'm telling you, what I've seen is exactly what Dave and Chauncy are talking about. Organizations that are genuinely, in my opinion, looking at disability almost as a competitive advantage because they have these programs, they want to attract you, right? And so disclosing can actually give you a competitive advantage. And that's sort of contrary to what I was taught when I was your age. I was told at one point by a professor not to tell people I have ADHD. And now I think that advice would be ludicrous. It's still a personal decision, but we're seeing a complete change from 10 years ago. All right. Well, I have another question here, and Chauncy, I was actually going to shoot it over to you, and then maybe Dr. Lee, if you'd be willing to comment on it after Chauncy shares, because you were referencing earlier the accommodation process and the fluidity of how you have conversations with so many different people throughout your organization. Big organization, by the way. Way to flex with the numbers earlier. I was like, all right. So how does that conversation about accommodations or about trying to promote disclosure, how does that become collaborative? How do we encourage not just a process, right? Where it's, oh, you check this box, you submit a form, but turn it into more of a collaborative discussion between two human beings to make sure that not only is the person successful, but also as a manager of someone with a disability, they're successful being a manager. How do you encourage that type of conversation?
Yeah, and you're talking about conversation between maybe a potential employee and employer, employee who's disabled. Yeah. So yeah, look, as a leader, first of all, I think cultures have been built and are leading, as we've already talked about, to where they're a lot more accepting and inclusive. I think it's incumbent upon in a situation wherever possible for us as leaders to make sure we're creating an environment. So for me, I disclose, right? I disclose that I have a disability, whereas I didn't before, and that power of representation kind of lends itself to collaboration, is what I found, right? And so I think as we're encouraging individuals to disclose as best as they feel comfortable, I think what you'll find is that some of your leaders or potential employers will do the same, right? I think it'll help foster collaboration. In a situation where you don't feel comfortable doing so, I think going through your HR department, having, uh, requesting those accommodations, hopefully your hiring managers will kind of lean into that and help drive the conversation. But at the end of the day, it comes down to just genuine, open communication, right? The power of genuine and open communication as much as you feel comfortable. And then looking for that culture, I like what you said, John, about disclosing early on and kind of gauging the reaction, kind of getting a sense of what you're kind of getting yourself into, and whether because you're interviewing that employer as much as they're interviewing you. I'll tell you that. And I'll also tell you that as an employer in today's environment, it's extremely difficult to find good employees. I'll tell you that. And so you all are sitting in a seat that many of us who are a little bit older, I'll say, speaking for myself, right? We may not have been as fortunate as some of you are now, that you can almost interview the companies that you're wanting to spend your time with, whether you're looking to do it for a short period of time and then move on, or whether you're looking to do it for the next 20, 30 years as I've done with Wells Fargo. But I would encourage you to interview, do your research on the companies that you're looking to apply to get a sense, because there's studies out there. There's disability equality indexes. There's different feedback that you can get and find out how companies rank amongst their peers as it relates to disability employment. And so all of that, I believe, as you enter the workforce, will help from a collaboration standpoint. And I say choose those companies that are more disability friendly. If it were me starting over, coming out of college now, absolutely, that's what I would do. I'd interview these companies almost in the sense of making sure I've done my research, asking questions when it came time during the interview process, right? And they say, hey, what questions do you have? I'd have 2 or 3 questions teed up to kind of spark that conversation during the interview, quite frankly. Now, everyone isn't going to feel comfortable doing that. I get it. But for those of you that do, I would encourage you to do so. And I think that conversation can start there. And if you don't get the vibe, quote unquote, speaking like my young kids here, if you don't get the vibe that you're looking for during that conversation, I say move on to the next one. That isn't the company for you, because not everyone is there. Again, we've come a long ways in the last 10 years. I would say and agree with Dave, but there are some that may not be there, and a lot of times it's not the organization. It may be the individual that's during the hiring, even though it's a great company. So you still will have to kind of gauge that individual hiring manager during that initial conversation. I can go on, but I'll be quiet so others can chime in here.
Well, first of all, the advice you just gave is phenomenal. So for all the students on the call, if that's not a paradigm shift that's encouraging to you, I don't know what would be. So thank you for sharing that. Dr. Lee, I know that you're
Yes.
still in an area. Hopefully that you're okay to be able to share your insights on this as well. Okay.
Yes, yeah. Actually, I grew up in South Korea, and I came here, to go to graduate school when I am 23. So, I wasn't really, it was not in my culture to, advocate yourself and, just tell what you need. But, when I came to America, the question I got a lot is, what do you need? How can I help you? And I was kind of appalled about how to answer for that. But I think over the years, I think it's really important to communicate what you need to people. And then also think about, how you can break down those things that you need, like ABC or whatever, and then ask person A a small favor, or ask person B about this is what you need, ask person C for, this is, something that this person could do to, that you can really work better, and something like that. So really, lessen their burden, but also clearly, communicate your need. And I think that it's a really good training for yourself in terms of your self-efficacy. And also you give them, this person ABC, a great opportunity to help you and doing good work, right? So I think, I think about communication in that sense, and then having, collaboration, and whenever also, asking for accommodation, if you can, try to, many people get involved, whether it's a HR, your team member, whomever that could be, because I think what we are trying to do here is really promote inclusive work environment and really providing the equity. So this is actually good business for everybody. So I think you were trying to kind of expand your, social network, and trying that, we are really promoting good practice here. So that's the strategy I would try to, to practice further.
Yeah, love it. Thank you so much. Dave, I see your hand popped up.
Yes, thank you. I was listening to Dr. Lee and everyone, and I was realizing that, there are probably some folks on the call. We've been very positive about disclosure. And for anyone who is still concerned, I just wanted to talk to you for a second, because I think there are still absolutely, especially mental illness conditions, substance abuse disorders. There are things that people, rightfully so, still will choose not to share with an employer. However, what I wanted you to know is you don't have to do a full disclosure. So to use the autism example, if you're concerned about someone's misunderstanding or bias around autism, I had a boss that was autistic who wouldn't mention autism necessarily, but they'd mention their need. So it might have been he had a very sensitivity to light, overhead lighting. So it might just be as simple as, hey, can I keep my baseball cap on in your nice restaurant? He's not going to say to the maitre d' he's autistic. It's unnecessary. You can give a partial disclosure to get the needs supported that you have. And that's really all you need to do. Some of these other conditions like autism, ADHD, they're getting wrapped in with a warm embrace by, corporate America. Something like schizophrenia is not yet. And so if you're in that boat, I just want to share with you, there are other ways that you can do this and partially disclose if you don't want to name the condition. I just wanted to share that.
Man,
I totally agree that you can, and same thing for informal conversations. If you meet a new person and you don't like eye contact, you can say, hey, just want to let you know, I'm not super comfortable with eye contact, but I am listening to you. So keep talking. I'm really interested in what you're saying. So you can disclose in lots of situations without, as Dave said, mentioning a specific condition. And there may be opportunities for those sorts of informal disclosures in college and in the workplace too, where you're like, you know what, I don't really need that many accommodations. I don't know if I want to have this on, official, but I'm going to go to my boss or I'm going to go to my instructor and just ask informally, hey, can I have this, can I get your, say to a instructor, can I get a recording of the lecture, or can you send me your notes? And if they're okay with it, then it's all good.
Yeah.
You may not be protected to the same way that you would if you had it on paper. So I'm not saying that that's the go-to strategy, but it is an alternative.
Yeah, it's a great suggestion for those of you who are uncomfortable or are nervous about it. I think it's great advice, Dave and Eric. Well, you perfectly teed up my final question before we go into some Q&A with everyone. So while folks are answering on the panel, if any of you have questions that you'd like us to respond to, please type them in the chat. And then I'll give an opportunity for any of you who may want to come off mute to ask a question in our remaining time together. But this is for all panelists. And Dave, maybe we'll start with you, and then if anyone else wants to add to it. So you referenced mental health conditions. You referenced one that's probably got the most stigma of any other mental health condition, which I appreciate, schizophrenia.
Mm-hmm.
And so how can students with any type of disability, whether it's a neurodivergent condition, a physical disability, doesn't matter, any type of disability, how can we give them advice on navigating the potential stigma and misconceptions of disability in the workplace? Because even though organizations are attracting talent and looking for talent, we all live in a society that's built off of that medical model of disability.
Yeah,
and there are still a lot of misconceptions and myths. It's one of the reasons I have a job and I'm able to do training, is because we're constantly changing the way people think about disability. So we know that's going to happen. How do we navigate that stigma?
Such a great and important question, and it's a hard one, and it's not necessarily your responsibility, okay? But there are ways that we can all help, and not to toot our own horn, but John just mentioned it: education and training. It doesn't have to be from Rangam. It could be from one of the incredible universities represented here. There's wonderful organizations, non-profit, for-profit. There's companies like Wells Fargo that can help connect you to trainers and curriculum that can help dismiss or dispel some of those myths and to fight back against some of that bias. One thing I want to just appeal to anyone on the call, like the folks on this panel who have been, courageous enough to self-disclose and to be really public-facing, be loud and proud about your disability. Please be a role model for the young people who are nervous about this and who are struggling to navigate this. I think it's really critical that we have, especially in the non-apparent disabilities, that we have more and more diverse role models that represent all races and genders and ages and types of jobs. It's not just white guys in IT. And that's what I'm afraid it's kind of looked like for the last few years in neurodiversity, and it's just not true. So that's just my last appeal, maybe, John, is for more loud and proud role models to show others that there's pathways and that there's opportunities for them.
Yeah.
And I just add to that, I'm a white guy, but I'm not in IT. Yeah, so you were asking about responding to stigma and discrimination and so on. If you are a person who is really sharp and on the ball and articulate, and you can respond on the spot effectively, then go for it. I'm not that person. But you know, they often give you advice like if you get an email that upsets you or gets you all, you know, outraged or worked up, that you should wait at least a half an hour before responding, probably longer than half an hour. You want to calm down and think through it carefully so you can be effective. If you're outraged and you respond out of anger or being offended, it's not that it's inappropriate to respond, but you may not be as effective as if you take that time to think about, okay, this person clearly doesn't understand my disability. This person clearly doesn't understand or diversity or low vision or whatever the issue is. What's going to be the most effective way to help correct the problem, which is, you know, as I see it, maybe their lack of understanding. Is it going to be to tell them, you know, that's a terrible thing to say, or is it going to be maybe to educate them or give them some information maybe they weren't aware of? You know, there's no one size fits all, but if you take time to step back and think about what's going to be effective here, what's the problem and how can I fix it, and not just sort of respond on the spot, you may make more of a difference.
Great advice. Yeah. I'm a firm believer that the number one barrier people with disabilities face are at all in society are the attitudes and beliefs of other people, often unconscious, and how that influences the way we design and develop our systems or processes in our spaces. And people change their attitudes and beliefs when they connect with things. And so to your point, Eric, the most effective way to influence someone's understanding of something is to have more in common with them than you have different. And we all have more in common than we have different, all of us, but we sometimes focus so much on the differences that it's easy to distance ourselves from one another. And so if you're able to emphasize and focus on those things throughout all the relationships you have, you will transform people more with that than ever responding, as Eric said, you know, getting angry and maybe not being as effective. So really great feedback. Dr. Lee, I see you came off mute. Did you have something you wanted to add before we get to questions from the audience?
Yes. Yeah. So I think there are also two aspects of the stigma. It's a stigma from other people or self-stigma. Since other people talk about the other thing, I would like to also, you know, tap onto the self-stigma. Also, you know, being stigma I need to work on. And I think, you know, what I want to tell you is that, you know, as a person with disability, you are the problem solver. You know, you are the survivor. You're resilient. You have much more strengths than you do. So, you know, toward that, I think, you know, you have a lot to, I think I think what you need is an opportunity to work on, and also to you know, really demonstrate your strengths and your talent.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if I may, I know we need to get to questions, John, but I just want to add on to that. So first of all, agreeing with everything that's been said, look, each of us here and each of you certainly have survived all the worst days of your life, right? You're in this position on this call because whatever your disability might be, you've overcome it to get to this point in your life. And you should be proud and confident in that and show up and encourage and lean into that, right? And also understand that someone told me this, and I didn't get it until later on in life, is that representation, it matters, and that there's someone that's probably looking at you and is very proud of who you are and what you've accomplished, and you don't even know it, right? You're showing up and what you've been able to achieve to get to this point in your life, in school. There's probably someone in your family, someone who just in passing that is looking at you and looking up to you, quite frankly, and you'll be surprised at how often that happens, that they're looking at you as an example of what can be, right? So today's point about disclosing and being confident and leaning into it, I echo that. And I would just encourage you to be confident, and that'll help eliminate the stigma, quite frankly. As you show up and you show that you can perform on par and better than others, it will help continue to help change the stigma. And I can go on, but I just want to just interject that real quick to lean into that and just know that the power that you have as a person with a disability, and that no matter how challenging the road ahead might appear to be, it's the road that you've already traveled. I'm sure for many of us was also equally challenging, and there's been days that you didn't think you'd get past it, and look at where you are now. So just a bit of encouragement there as we close out and go to questions. Sorry.
No, please don't apologize. That was beautiful. I hope all of you found this informative and encouraging. I would love to turn it over to you all, our audience, and see if any of you have questions for the panelists. We'd be happy to answer. Feel free to raise your hand and come off mute or type it in the chat.